an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Unspoiled, covering White Oleander by Janet Finch. A book about mothers and daughters, just in time for Mother's Day. Let's talk about how terrible some moms can be, and how we learn to move on with our lives. Welcome to Unspoiled. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha.
And I'm Jaime. Take two.
Take two. We only got about 5 minutes in before Jaime realized she had not pressed record.
Not even 5 minutes. I'm kind of proud.
It wasn't too bad.
Yeah,
so,
Jaime,
so
much worse. Yeah.
You really wanted us to cover this one.
Yes. I read it.
What's your attachment to this?
I read it back in like 2002, 2003. And I thought it was really beautifully written and really affecting and interesting. Mm-hmm. And it stayed with me. And I hadn't read it since, but I always, I've moved around a lot and I get rid of a lot of books whenever I move. And this is one that just was never even a question. I was not getting rid of it. Mm-hmm. So going into it, I was like, what I liked when I was in my early 20s is not quite the same anymore. Mm-hmm. But I was pleasantly surprised that this book holds up. I like the way she wrote it. I like the little stories that she told. And I don't know, it's just an interesting look at foster care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the first take you had mentioned that you expected there to be a lot more like themes about abuse in the foster care system part of the story. And I have to agree that I expected it to be worse in that respect. It's either outright abuse, whether that be physical or sexual abuse, or it's the kind of abuse where somebody is taking advantage of, like, for example, there was a family in Texas that it turned out was like taking in foster kids in order to have them work the ranch that they owned. So they were like exploiting them for labor. And that's not really as big an issue in this story as you would expect. Yeah,
there's also all those stories about people taking in foster kids because you get paid. And then the kids are super neglected and the foster parents are just collecting checks. Yeah, that ties in pretty well with the having them work the land for me. Yeah. I'll take I'll get paid in order to like employ children. It's really something.
Yeah. So okay, this story, I went into it really knowing nothing. Mm-hmm. I had seen the title when the movie came out, and all I knew was that there was a mother and daughter, and that just the like movie poster really gave the impression that this was an unhealthy relationship. You could just see from the body language of the two of them on this poster that this was no good. And that's all I knew going into it. So you can imagine my surprise when it starts off with a woman poisoning her ex-boyfriend to death. Mm-hmm. It's so incredibly quick moving. I listened to the audiobook. It was only 6 hours long. Narrated by Oprah.
Oh, really?
Which was real weird. Yeah. She actually was pretty good at it, but at first it took me a minute to like really like relax into it because I initially was just like, what is this?
I feel like her voice is too Oprah. It's too recognizable. I don't think I'd ever really be able to sink into the story.
She sounds Oprah-y for about the first like half hour. Okay. And then she starts to really get into some accents and voices that I wouldn't have expected she could do.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I was pleasantly surprised because I definitely was. The only thing was that there were some stretches where she was very slow, and I never speed things up. But I actually put this on 1.25 speed because there's a couple moments where it's like, and truckers passing by thinking about pancakes. Like that kind of speed. And I was like, oh my God, can you please just tell me what's happening?
She was halfway through the job. She's like, I'm just tired. I'm real tired today, guys. I just don't have it in me. Oprah is the reason that this book became anything, to be honest. Like, Janet Fitch wrote the book, but Oprah put it on her Oprah's book club, and it became a bestseller.
Yeah, that magical snap of the fingers that she had for that period.
And then it became a movie.
Well. Yeah, and you said that the movie's actually pretty good, right?
The movie is good. We actually just watched it because I realized I was going to rent it on iTunes, and I'm like, I might actually own this movie. And so I went to my little folder of DVDs, and there it was. So Jason and I just watched it, and he was crying at the end, which is so cute.
Aww.
It is a good movie. It hits all of the major points. It cuts out some things.
Okay.
But it hits the major, homes that she was in that affected her. The one with Star, the one with Claire, and then the one with Reena, the Russian.
Right.
And then when she's in the, facility.
Right.
But it cut out the one where her whole relationship with the black woman next door. Which
okay.
I love that part of the book, but it leaves that out. And then the one where she is starved, it leaves that out too.
Wow.
But I think there's only so much time you can put into a movie.
Yeah.
And they made Michelle Pfeiffer plays the mom in the movie, and she's perfection. But she plays the Ingrid role a little more sympathetically and is written a little more sympathetically than she is in the book. She's pretty irredeemable in the book.
Yeah, I feel like I have been noticing that in movies and television, they don't seem to be as willing to make people as you put it, irredeemable as they are in original works. I've noticed that there's this tendency to try and humanize characters or give them some sort of it's almost like they're trying to offer the audience a bone a little bit. Like they're afraid that this is going to be too relentless to an audience.
Give me one example that's not a female character.
Well, that's true. Because the one that I always think of is Cersei.
Yeah.
Every time. She's the one. I haven't seen, for example, Sharp Objects, which I really want to watch, but I also don't.
No, I think you should. It's actually a really good adaptation.
I mean, it's not that I don't want to watch it because I'm afraid it's not good. I don't want to watch it because that book was so emotional and draining that I'm not sure I can put myself through the story again. I loved Sharp Objects. Don't get me wrong. I thought it was awesome, but it was just a lot.
In that one, they don't pull punches.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Who's an example that isn't a female character, but it's still Game of Thrones is Tyrion. Tyrion really has a pretty downhill slide in the books that's sort of ugly and starts to get into some territory that you sort of stop rooting for him to a degree. I wouldn't say stop, but it's tough. And in the show, they've really made him sympathetic all the way through. Yeah,
they also cut out that entire part of his story, so...
Yeah, there's portions of the story that they've, what I'm thinking of is some of his behavior after leaving King's Landing and everything. But anyway.
Yeah, it's done. I mean, and sometimes it's done in a good way, like how the Marvel villains in the last few movies have been a little more sympathetic, or you can kind of see their side. But... Right. It's rare that sort of, we can't make this person wholly terrible happens to a male character, because with men, they can just be whatever. And women have to be sympathetic, and they have to be moms. Yeah. And they can't be a terrible mom. They have to love their children. And sometimes moms don't love their children.
Let's talk about moms, because I'm blessed with a pretty damn good mom. I have my issues with my mom. Don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. And there's definitely stuff that in retrospect I'm like, oh, that's no good. But I have always felt pretty close to her. Mm-hmm. And this time of year, tomorrow is Mother's Day. Somebody like Owen, for example, has a really hard time because it's supposed to be, it's Mother's Day. There's nothing but signs and cards and displays around. Let mom know how much you love and appreciate everything she's done for you. And how do you navigate that when your mother's literally never done shit for you? Yeah. Like, bare minimum, did not even try to, like, keep you fed kind of thing.
I don't know. I mean, I had issues with my mom, as most people do. My mom was very, very selfish for a very long time. She chose her husband over me, even though he abused me. Mm-hmm. It was very complicated, and Mother's Day was not something that I even gave a shit about because I wasn't sending her a card. She wasn't getting gifts. She picked him over me. He shot me. Like, with a BB gun.
Awesome.
Yeah. Like, to show my brothers that it hurts when you shoot people.
Let me show you on someone else.
Yeah. Like,
cool.
Fucked up stuff. And so it took a long time for me to get past stuff, to forgive her. And now we have a really good relationship, but when Mother's Day cards come around, I'm like, yeah, this doesn't really apply.
It's a really complicated, because everything, it's like, thanks for always being there, or thanks for the support and the love and and it's like, a lot of us didn't have that sort of experience.
Yeah.
Oh, Rashawn's here. Hi, Rashawn. And so it can be a really, the opening of this book is her describing, and this is before she has these revelations about what really happened when she was younger to cause her to have the fear of abandonment that she has. Mm-hmm. But all the first chapter, I had to stop at one point and just take some deep breaths because the atmosphere that she lives in is a constant state of feeling like she is holding her mother back.
Yep.
Always feeling like she's asking too much, that she shouldn't ask for anything. She's embarrassed by other people around her who ask things of their parents and just looks at them like, aren't you ashamed of yourself for needing something from your parents? You shouldn't really ask them for anything. You should be grateful that they're here at all.
She doesn't even want to tell her mom that her feet grew out of her shoes.
Yeah, because she's like, oh, well, that's another thing that she won't be able to buy because now she has to spend that money on shoes for me. Mm-hmm. And I don't, my mother never said anything of the sort to me, that I was like a burden. She never said, but I distinctly remember feeling this way as a child. Like, feeling guilty for needing stuff. And my mother, I think, was not the person who was like, I think it was my father who was like socking money away. Or she was socking money away without telling him so that she could buy me school clothes and stuff without telling him about it. And she would ask me to keep it secret from him that she had got me stuff and to just tell him that I had had this for a while when I wore my new thing out to school. So it was like, it was her trying to protect me from it, but inadvertently really letting me know that we shouldn't be getting you stuff. He doesn't think that you deserve to have it, and we need to pretend that you don't have it if this comes up. And it's a really weird place to be when your parent is trying to sort of keep you from feeling a certain way, mm-hmm. but that by that action actually causes that feeling to happen. And the whole opening of feeling like she's holding her mother back, that she is a drain on her energy, on all of her resources, that her mother deserves better than to be chained down here. She says about herself that she is chaining her, and then says, and aren't chains ashamed of their prisoners? Basically that, she is ashamed of herself. And this is a heavy opening. You know, this is the first chapter, and it's just, Rashawn says, making you an accomplice. Yup. And, she was doing the best she knew how to do, but, Lord, it's a weird thing to realize how much you internalize that sort of thing. And the fact that Astrid winds up being able to step outside of that and see it for what it is and move past it and start to demand things for herself is a really inspiring thing that I feel like so many women need to learn to do.
Yeah.
And some of us don't even realize, like, we think of ourselves as demanding people already because our threshold is so low for what that looks like, that we're just like, oh, well, I'm very selfish. And then we realize, oh my God, I'm so much less so than so many, especially men in the world.
Yeah, but our needs and our wants and our desires are secondary to whatever they need or want.
So
I do like that the men in this book are secondary.
Oh, most definitely secondary, yeah.
Not one of them is actually important.
It's interesting because the men are secondary, but they affect the women so profoundly that it's almost offensive that somebody who isn't a main character can have the kind of power that these guys have in the story. So yeah, Rashawn's saying, I thought I'd read the book, but I actually haven't. I've only seen the movie and it wrecked me. Yeah. Jaime was saying that the movie is really good. So to start off with, the first man that's like the main feature of the opening story is Barry. And the thing about Barry is that he's super ordinary. And it's very clear that Ingrid, who is Astrid's mother, she does not trust men and does not want to be involved with anybody. She has closed herself off in a lot of ways.
She also thinks he's completely beneath her.
Right. Yeah, she's definitely a narcissist in, I was going to say a much more poisonous way than I even mean that a lot of the time. And then I was like, oh, that's perfect. But yeah, this disdain that she has for literally everybody, and the way that she frames it, that if somebody is like cares about anything, that they are somebody to be sort of pitied, it's really revealing about her mindset. But he comes into her life and convinces her against her better judgment to give him a chance. And then he kind of gets he gets involved enough in her life that like Astrid begins to really like him and spends time with him on her own. And it's like, you know, it's serious. And then he ghosts her. And there's a pretty intense scene where Ingrid drives to his house. They're kind of like having a heated conversation at the door. She goes inside and just leaves her daughter in the driveway, who begins to play the radio to sort of occupy herself because she isn't going in there. She knows better. And then she comes out like half an hour later and is like white-faced and sits there and says, "We made love, and then he told me I had to leave because he had a date." And is pretty devastating. Like, do I approve of murder? No. But is that at least a reason to slash a man's tires?
Sure.
No, yeah, definitely.
Is it a reason to erase his hard drive? Yeah.
That's brutal. Oh my God. So yeah, that's her first step. She breaks into his house. She's got a key, but it's breaking and entering, really. But she goes in and erases his entire hard drive and then finds the backup disks and runs a magnet over them so that everything that he has backed up is gone too. And he shows up at her house flipping out. They won't open the door. He like breaks a window and causes a whole scene, and it makes him look really bad. So later when she goes to his house again and begins to like fuck with everything, she can be like, oh, he is stalking me. He's making all this up. You can ask the neighbors. He was here and broke a window the other day. Mm-hmm. And she really plays it quite well for a while. But she can't quite let it go at that. They go down to Mexico and they get this drug that's meant to make it easier to absorb other drugs through your skin, right?
Yeah, I think that's how it's described.
So she gets all of these white oleanders and belladonna, I think, and boils them to get the poisons concentrated and mixes them with that drug and paints all of his doorknobs with it. And it's like she wants to get caught. It's sort of weird how little effort she seems to put in to keeping herself from being the suspect in this crime.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's just like, I don't know. It feels like, and maybe that's part of what Astrid is struggling with, is the feeling that her mother didn't even care that she was most definitely going to be arrested and taken away. And so she, like, her daughter and caring for her was just not even a factor in what she was choosing to do here.
I don't think her daughter was a factor in what she was choosing to do here.
Oh,
she was getting her revenge.
Not. Yeah.
The drug is called DMSO. It's a stuff that it helps you absorb drugs through your skin. It's how the nicotine patch works, is what it says. It's seasickness patches. And it says that hippies would mix it with LSD and paint the doorknobs of public buildings.
Right. That's something that she says that people were afraid that hippies would do.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I used to worry that they would do that.
But then it's like, she's like, they're not going to waste any of their hard-bought drugs on squares.
Yeah, that's like all the people at Halloween time that are like, be careful of those gummy bears. People are going to be putting their edibles in your kid's Halloween bag. And like, no, they're not. Those things are fucking expensive.
Edibles are expensive. Hi, no.
Yeah, it's not going in some kid's Halloween bag. Trust me.
Oh my God. So yeah, this dude turns up dead. Mm-hmm. And she is found guilty, 25 years to life, and is taken away. And this is Astrid being put into the foster system. And the first time that Astrid sees her mother in prison, I don't think she's been tried yet, her mother is so drugged up that she doesn't even recognize her own daughter. Mm-hmm. I'm really curious. We don't get any information about that. All we get is, like, later when they're going to appeal, the lawyer being like, that was totally not cool. Like, that's definitely something we'll bring up, but I don't know what that was about.
I'm guessing that Ingrid was probably acting out or, fighting back, and they drugged her to keep her calm.
Sedated her.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
But according to the lawyer later, they used every drug they could. So
yeah.
They, over-drugged her.
I mean, listen, if you were around Ingrid, you'd probably want to use every drug on her that you could, I think. And I want to say, too, that this is a weird thing that, made me kind of paranoid at first, that I had gotten, an abridged version of the story. Because on the Wikipedia page for this book, and I'll sometimes use the Wikipedia summary as a guide when I'm doing the recording so that I remember what order events go in. But I just recently finished this, so I'm not having trouble remembering the order of things. And this plot summary is completely out of order.
Really?
And has all kinds. Yeah, it has the whole thing with Claire and her husband Ron as being the very last family that she stays with. And that's the second family that she stays with. The whole way that this is set up is not actually correct.
It's the third.
It's the third?
Yeah, she's with Star. Then she goes with Marvel, where she meets Olivia and gets attacked by a dog. And then she goes to Claire's. After she's been in the hospital and stitched up and stuff is when she goes to Claire.
Okay. I'm wondering if I didn't get... There's no other option on Audible for this book.
Wait, you don't...
It doesn't say... I don't remember her getting attacked by a dog.
It's, you know how she's staying with that lady, and next door is the black woman who's a prostitute or an escort.
Nope.
No? That's unfortunate.
Wow. And like, I don't space out when I listen to these.
That is really no wonder it was 6 hours, because they cut out a whole chunk.
Wow. It does not say, it always says, if that's the case, that it's abridged. Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah,
sorry, guys.
she's at Stars. All that stuff happens at Stars, where she is shot. And then she goes in the hospital. She has a little bit of rehab. And then she is placed at this house with this woman named Marvel and her husband, Ed. And they've got these little babies, little kids that they kind of put on her to babysit all the time. And next door is this black woman who has this like champagne colored Corvette, and she like this beautiful yard, and she's always wearing these gorgeous clothes, and Astrid is really intrigued by her. And she's even more intrigued by her because this foster mother, Marvel, is a clear racist and is always talking about what a whore this woman is. So Astrid like goes out of her way to befriend the woman next door, whose name is Olivia. She is a like escort. She used to work at a bank, and she realized, I can make more money doing this other thing, and it's a man's world, and why shouldn't I have my part of it? Have nice things, make a lot of money, have nice cars, travel the world, and I don't need a corporate job for that. Just use what I've got. And eventually, the foster mother realizes that Astrid has been spending time over there because on Christmas Eve, Astrid falls asleep over there. And so she calls the police, and so Olivia goes away, and Astrid's all mad, and she goes for a walk at night and ends up getting attacked by 2 stray dogs. And one bites her in the face, and one bites her in the arm.
Shit.
And so she has to get all stitched up and stuff, and then she eventually goes to another foster home after that. I
cannot believe that whole section is taken out.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I wonder what made that feel like that was a disposable... Like, I'm always really curious about how, if they do decide to cut things for an audiobook, how they decide what's going to get cut and what isn't.
I don't know, because it's not in the movie, like Rashawn is saying. It's definitely not in the movie. In the book, it's her relationship with Olivia is really formative to her. It teaches her this phrase, it's a man's world. And she holds on to that throughout the rest of the book. Like, anytime she questions whether she deserves something or whether she should have something, she's like, well, it's a man's world, and I deserve stuff too. I deserve this too.
Huh. Wow, I'm super bummed now. And I'm realizing that in tiny print under here, abridged audiobook, and it's the only audiobook available.
Yeah.
And White Oleander is a pretty famous book, and usually if they do an abridged version of an audiobook, they will also have the full version. And
I'm really surprised.
I'm bummed, man. I missed a whole part of this story.
So if they cut that out, did they cut out the woman, the foster home where she gets starved, where the foster mother puts a lock on the refrigerator so the girls who live there cannot eat?
Yes, they did cut that.
Oh my God.
That rang a bell for me because I remembered seeing that in the summary. But I breezed past it because I was more concerned with the fact that what they posted in there and the summary was out of order. And now that you're saying this, I'm like, that's gone too.
Actually, that's where she is before she goes to Claire's.
Okay, so they cut out everything between Star and Claire.
Yeah, because she's at this place after the dog bite, and it's this Latina woman who has these white girls, I think they're mostly white girls, that are her fosters, and she starves them. She picks a favorite, and that one gets to eat stuff with her, and the other ones get hardly anything, and Astrid is literally, going to school and pulling food out of the trash to eat. And so after a month, she contacts her foster care worker, her caseworker, and she's like, I am being starved. You need to put me somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And, emphatically, as, I'm wasting away. I literally am eating out of the trash. And I'm begging for money on the street. So you have to get me out of here. Oh, no, she's the only white girl. The other ones are Latino girls, and they think that the reason she got pulled out so quickly is because she's white. And she's like, no, it's because I demanded it, and you didn't.
I mean, maybe.
Meh.
It really seems like if somebody's starving a child, all the children should get pulled.
Yeah.
But, whatever. I just can't, I can't believe that these two things got taken out. And
it's really a bummer.
This is the first time this has ever happened, because I have run into almost getting the abridged version of a couple different audio, because I know a lot of people say that you don't absorb things the same way, or you can sort of fail to pay attention, but that happens for me with podcasts. With audiobooks, that does not happen. The instant that I start to space, I press pause and focus on whatever it is that's gotten my attention. I get so engrossed in a story, and it can be a lot harder for me to focus sitting and reading than it is to listen while I'm doing something else. There's something about the passiveness of having an activity that causes that focus to sharpen somehow. Does that make sense?
Yes, sort of, except I'm the exact opposite. If I'm listening to...
Yeah, there's no dog bite or black woman in the movie.
Yeah. And I knew that going into watching the movie this time around, because I knew that those characters were not in there. But it's still, I feel like it takes a little bit away from Astrid's growth.
Yeah.
Because she learns from each place she goes to.
I just can't, that feels so... I just don't understand why this is the only version of the audiobook available. That's the main thing to me.
I don't know. Blame Oprah.
Version, okay, fine. But, what the fuck? Why is this the only one? And yeah, I am going to blame Oprah. You're right.
She should know better.
But on the other hand, I am kind of glad that I was spared having to listen to her being starved, because that sounds...
It's very quick.
Tough.
Because she's not there for very long, so it's not a very large portion of the book. She's only there for a month.
Gotcha.
But it's just so shocking, because the house is really nice, and it seems like it's a great place to live, and then the refrigerator is padlocked.
Yeah. Yikes. Well, so much for what I said about how there isn't too much abuse in these.
Well, that's why...
I guess I missed a couple of the important ones.
When, in our messed up first take of this recording, I was saying that there was only one place that she went where she was actually abused, and that's the one I was talking about. All the other ones are not abusive at all.
Yeah, I was counting Star because of how it winds up, but it's not an ongoing...
No. Although
it just sort of devolves.
That shit's hard to read now when I think about the fact that she's 13. Mm-hmm. In the movie, the guy that they cast to play Ray is smoking hot. And so there's a part of you that's like, yeah, I'd do it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like it's really well written in that she has, I feel like she is really committed to presenting it completely from the point of view of the 14-year-old girl involved with this guy. Mm-hmm. So she doesn't try and, she has Star yelling at him, what the fuck is wrong with you? She's a child. But on her end, the initial attraction to him because he's kind and because he touches and holds her in a way that she hasn't been in so long. Ever, yeah. And because he is a male figure when she has never really had that in her life, it feels so understandable and so almost natural in a way that she would feel this way about him.
Yeah, and also he's not a predator. He's not seeking her out. He's not trying to make this happen. She's the instigator of all of it.
I would disagree that he's not I wouldn't say that he's sizing her up to he's not grooming her, in other words.
No, I don't think this was his intention with her. I think he makes comments like, you're a very pretty girl. I think he is attracted to her, but if she hadn't initiated things, I don't think he ever would have
probably
done anything.
Not. But I do the fact that he finds ways to be alone with her the way that he does all the time is suspect to me. It feels like that's his out. That, like, I'm not going to initiate it, but I'm going to make sure to create an atmosphere where she feels okay with initiating. And then I can fall back on, well, I didn't start it. Which is like, you know, classic, I'm not going to take responsibility even though I'm the fucking adult in this scenario.
Yeah. There is a line in the movie, giving the movie credit, we never see them doing what they do.
Okay.
But there is a scene where the two of them are alone together, and he's like in the kitchen, and she's like getting a plate to get a piece of pizza, and she keeps looking at him, and he just looks at her, and he's like, you know, this is wrong. Mm-hmm. So in the movie, they also give him a little bit of he's not a predator kind of vibe. It also is, you know, they cast somebody really hot, and I think that will change an audience's view of it too, where it's like, well, I mean, two really attractive people. I mean, even though he's an adult and she's a child, he's also much younger in the book, or in the movie, than he is in the book.
Yeah, it feels like Hollywood has a problem with that kind of thing, where they want to, like, show this, but they don't want to really show it. Like, I remember, because I loved the first season of Desperate Housewives so much. And there is a whole,
surprising to me.
The first season is just, like, so goofy and well done. And there is a woman who's having an affair with her.
The gardener guy, right?
Yeah. And there was a behind the scenes thing where they were talking about casting the boy that they got to play the gardener, who's, you know, like 25 or 23 or something, gorgeous. And that they initially auditioned actual teenage boys and had them reading with each other. And everybody was so creeped out.
Yeah, because
the teenage boys has a very different look when they're really teenage boys.
Yeah.
And they were just like, okay, no, we can't do this. We need people to be sort of sympathetic to her. And so we're going to have to cast somebody older and just pretend he's a high schooler.
Yeah.
And I just think that happens so often. And I think we underestimate how much us changing that dynamic, that visual dynamic, affects the way we think of those kinds of relationships.
Yeah. Because on screen, if Alison Lohman, who plays Astrid, looked 14, as young as she looks in this movie, she was not 14. She was like 24. If she looked 14, an actual 14-year-old girl looks like a 11-year-old girl.
Yeah.
Most of the time. It would have been very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yep. I just feel like, and the way that this goes, it's so on brand because Star clearly does, like, she has a lot of internalized misogyny. She has some real, like, struggles with with her role and the role of women, I feel like. So she sees what's going on because she can pick up on the friggin' signs.
Sure.
Because she apparently recognizes something from Astrid. She sees herself at Astrid's age. It reminds her of herself. And it really made me want to know more about Star and what her situation was growing up. That she was ever in a position like this as well. And that she isn't actually... It doesn't feel like she's grown. It doesn't feel like she's like, I realized that what I was doing stemmed from such and such, and I look back now and regret what I did. It feels like she still holds her child self responsible and is holding Astrid responsible as well when she's supposed to be holding the guy responsible. Yeah. And rather than stop and be like, well, maybe a guy that's going to fuck a 14-year-old isn't somebody I want in my life or around my other kids, she decides that she's going to, like, keep Astrid in the house because getting rid of her might jeopardize her relationship with this other guy, which is just such a real thing that happens. It's super gross, and I just, and the way that she had been on the wagon, and as things progress between Astrid and Ray, she begins to devolve and start drinking again and stops going to church and doing any of the things in the community that were sort of her anchor, and obsesses over what's going on between the two of them, but she never actually catches them.
Yeah.
She just knows. And that's really sad. Like, that whole thing, you know, I really don't hold Astrid responsible the way that Star does, but I sympathize with Star, like, kind of coming to loose ends finally and, like, losing it. I just wish that she had shot Ray. Just shoot Ray, though.
We don't know that she didn't later.
That's true. That's true. We don't actually hear about that. So I'll hold on to that. Let's pretend that's what happened.
I just feel really bad for Davy. Poor little Davy.
I know. Yeah, when she beats him up and then she, like, like, at first she's just like, whatever, you're always whining. And then she realizes, like, what she did and that his arm is dislocated. That's a pretty rough moment.
Yeah, and, like, who knows where his father is, and then Star has shot a child. Mm-hmm. And Ray has run off, and poor Davy probably ended up in foster care.
Probably, yeah.
And that other foster kid went to another foster home.
So that's the last time, at least. Like, it feels like Astrid really learned a lesson there, because it's not like men in the foster home she goes into later aren't interested in her also. But she is holding them at arm's length. Like, when they go camping, she says that she notices how Claire's husband looks at her. And she just, like, is very firm about saying, but I did nothing to encourage him and kept my distance. Like, she is just like, not making that mistake again. I was just like, sweetie, I wish that there was, like, I wish there was a resource for you to find somebody who could fill this role in your life without it being so shit where you eat. You know what I mean? Basically, like, it's obvious that a fellow high schooler isn't going to do it for her, though. So I don't know what that would even have looked like.
Well, she's looking for a father.
Mm-hmm.
And what she's learning is, if it's not your own actual father, you are something that these guys think that they can fuck.
Mm-hmm.
So she's never going to really find it, no matter what. And most likely, even if it were like, even later on in the book, the professor, in like the very end of it, when she's in Berlin, please tell me that part was in the book. Even that professor, she's like, I know he wants to sleep with me. Mm-hmm. Even though I have this boyfriend, even though, like, I've made it clear that I'm not interested in that. Like, any sort of man she comes across that is an older man where she would like to have this sort of mentor, father, daughter sort of relationship, they all want to sleep with her.
Yep. That I have a close friend who was abused by an uncle and a stepfather and a principal.
Oh my God.
And they were all men that she was looking to fill the place of a father who is absent. And as she got older and started to realize what was happening, she avoided men that she got that sense about in favor of men that seemed kinder and sweeter, feeling like they could be trusted, and then began to realize that they also were like that. They just played it out longer. They bided their time more, and they were a lot more subtle about it. Mm-hmm. So there was, like, one particular instance of this, like, old man that she had met, like, at work. He was, like, a customer. And he was really kind and came in and chatted with her every day. And she started to, like, get to know him better and look forward to him coming in because he was so nice. And then after, like, a year and a half of this, he told her he wanted to go down on her. And, like, kind of out of nowhere. It was like he had decided, okay, I've laid the groundwork, here we go. And that happened throughout her life. And she just finally gave up on men entirely. She was like, okay, there's no way that this is... And it seems like that's a really common story.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, I just can't... This is the sort of thing that I feel like when men get defensive, they don't understand how many women have had this sort of experience repeated, like, dozens of times with many different men throughout their lives.
They don't understand.
They really think that we're exaggerating.
Yeah.
You know?
And how could we be when there's so many of us that can say, oh yeah, that happened to me in this instance. And then also in this instance.
Yeah.
And then this other time.
Yep.
And they're like, you're just seeing things. You're
reading into it.
You're reading into it wrong. Yeah. It's like, no, I'm really not. Just like the time that my roommate and I counted how many times as we walked a quarter mile from our house to the club where we were going to see a band play, how many times we got yelled at out of cars. And we stopped counting at 50.
Yup.
Like,
but we're overreacting.
Yeah. And we were like, at first we thought it was funny, and then we're like, oh my God, seriously again?
Yeah. Oh God. I'm just so like, I appreciate that. It's not like women come off super well in this book either. Like there's a lot of terrible women as well, but she is very clear about the role that men play throughout this. So let's talk about Claire. Because
poor Claire.
I feel for her so much. The thing about Claire is that as much sympathy as Astrid has, she's also like disgusted with her sometimes.
Only after her mother puts those thoughts in her head, though.
Yes. Well, I would say that even if her mother hadn't put the thoughts in her head, seeing the way that Astrid's husband reacts, what's his name?
In the book, it's Ron.
Ron. Seeing the way that he reacts might have put it in her head also, but I don't know that for sure.
And we'll never know, because before we can see if that's how Astrid would respond to the situation, her mother has already put the 27 names for tears in her head.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty great line.
So what happens here is that this is the first time anybody has really like made Astrid the priority. All of her other foster homes, she has been there with like more than one other kid. They've had jobs, they've been away, or they've, they're fitting in taking care of her around a million other things. But in this instance, Claire is stay at home. She like goes out and does auditions, but we rarely ever hear of her actually working.
No, only one time.
Yeah. And she is home when Astrid comes home from school, makes her sandwiches and a nice tea when she gets home, and is just like there for her and involves her she involves herself in Astrid's life, making sure that she's like getting good grades and trying to go to art school and all of these like concerns about her future and getting to know who she is and what her priorities are as a person.
Yeah, she actually asks her questions.
Her own priorities. Yeah.
Like she asks her questions that Astrid's never been asked, and so she's never even thought about herself. What's your favorite color?
Yep. Yeah, it's really touching. And it was one of those that I was like, I know this isn't going to end well, and I'm really dreading how this is going to wind up.
How did you think it was going to end?
I don't think I had anything clearly in mind. I don't think I expected her to commit suicide. I think that I thought Astrid might actually decide that she wanted nothing to do with her at some point, that there was going to be like a dropping of the other shoe, and Astrid would like see like maybe I guess you know what I'm realizing, the way that Astrid's mother poisons Claire, I think I expected her to poison Astrid and cause her to resent Claire somehow and make Astrid push Claire away. But
I
expected that's not how that happened.
When it became kind of clear that Claire and Ron got Astrid as sort of a babysitter for Claire, that they would end up sending her back. And then when they have that argument where he says, this isn't working, you should send her back, and Claire doesn't doesn't agree and doesn't disagree. And so Astrid is really upset because she's like, she's going to send me back. I don't matter to her. Yeah. All that matters to her is him. And I wish she knew that he's not worth it. And that leads to Claire actually committing suicide. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought, like, this is a moment, like, oh my God, this woman is actually going to send her back because of him.
Yeah. I felt so, like, it's just so hard to read somebody getting what they want. Now that I'm an adult and I know how stories like this go, these bright spots in books like this are tougher to read than they ever were, because it's like, I know this isn't going to last.
Yeah.
And it's such a shame to have that attitude, because then it starts to bleed over into life, where if things are going well for you, you just start to be like, well, obviously this isn't going to last. So let's see how long I can ride this pleasant chapter before everything inevitably blows up in my face.
I read an analysis of this book, and they said when they realized that the Claire stuff was halfway into the book and there was still another half of the book left, they knew that there was no way that this was going to last.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the whole thing with Ron, he's so incredibly selfish and has no, like, he reframes everything so that it's her fault that she is depressed, that she is like, and
that she's not trying to not be depressed.
Right. And he, like, doesn't see that the way that he is constantly abandoning her for work. I'm not saying that he made her depressed, but he's not supporting her at all.
No.
He's acting like just telling her to go get help is support, as he packs his fucking bags and walks out the door. And the fact that, and he tries to tell her, well, you said that you'd be better if we got a child, and now she's taking care of you, and that wasn't supposed to be the point. Meanwhile, Astrid's listening, and she's like, that was exactly the point. You guys took me on so that I could look after her, and you know it. That's exactly what you wanted.
Yeah,
and honestly,
you wanted
I'm
a babysitter.
fine with that. Yeah. And Astrid's like, I'll do that. If that's, like, you know, if that's what we're all going to agree to, that's fine. But don't, like, lie about what the fuck this was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, you know, of course, I'm expecting her to, like, suddenly decide if she's going to kill herself, because she starts talking about it vaguely. She doesn't do the, like, sudden, I'm going to take all these pills, I'm going to slit my wrists, I'm going to hang myself. It's a slow intake of alcohol and pills to ease herself into death so that she doesn't suddenly vomit it all up and ruin her chance. This was her being very serious and methodical about it.
Yeah.
She had time to think it over, you know, and she did not reverse her course. And there's something so much more heartbreaking about that, the way that it went down, that she was, like, talking with him in the living room about what was going on while basically in the middle of her suicide. And
you think she'd already started it?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think that she had started and was like, well, at least this will make me feel better temporarily, and if I want to keep this going, I'll have gotten a head start, kind of thing.
Because she was definitely drinking, but she made this whole Christmas dinner that they hadn't gotten to yet, and she was definitely drinking wine, and she had been drinking wine for a while.
I'm talking about when he comes home after leaving at Christmas, and they get into that fight. That's when she's on the couch and she's...
That was on Christmas Eve, because then he gets a call that something is happening and he has to leave now. And she's like, but it's Christmas. And he's like, but it's work.
No, I'm talking about when he comes back after that.
He doesn't come back. She kills herself that night. Doesn't she?
No, they have Christmas, and she, like, feels bad because she feels like she ruined Astrid's Christmas, and she, like, doesn't want to open the gifts that he got for her because he's not there. And she's wearing a bathrobe that he gave her the night before. And it's like 2 days, and then he comes home, and she has been on the couch drinking for a couple days right through Christmas by the time he gets home. So, and Astrid gives her a present of something. I can't even remember what she gives her. Oh, she does a portrait.
Yeah, you're right. He gets a call on Christmas Eve and he leaves. They have a big fight.
Yeah. And then when he comes home is when she, like, when he walks in, she's already drunk. And I think that she had, like, gotten a slow start there already. Okay.
Yeah, you're right. I just, in my head, it was all the same night.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like she sensed that the fact that he was willing to leave on Christmas when this was clearly so important to her was the thing that really set her off. But she was willing to try and clean it up, even so. Even as upset and betrayed as she felt by that, him coming home was the last chance that he had to kind of make it up to her and make it clear that he realized how much he had let her down. And when he shows no interest in that whatsoever and is not apologetic at all, that's when it seems like she's just sort of sailing right past the line. And then he says, it seems like you need some time to think it over, and packs, which is just inexcusable, leaving somebody at that point and acting like you don't know what's going to happen. Like, and I'm so glad he said, he has the fucking gall to say to Astrid, you were supposed to watch her. And she just says, you were the one who left. And he starts crying and I'm like, good. She's a child, you douche.
Yeah.
Like, this is not her responsibility. What the fuck is wrong with you? I got so angry at him. Oh my God. Ugh. I hope he lives with that guilt forever. This fictional character.
In the movie, they're having a fight and he says we should get rid of Astrid, and she, in order to make him not leave, says that she will. She agrees to it. Fine, we'll send her back. And I feel like that is such a disservice to the character of Claire.
Agreed.
And the relationship that she has with Astrid. But then he leaves anyway, and Claire, like, goes in her room and takes pills, which we don't know until later. And Astrid is talking to her and lays down with her, and she's like, he'll be back. And Claire says, no, he's not coming back. And then they fall asleep. And when they wake up in the morning, Astrid sees that she took all these pills. And the way they frame it is as if she got up while Astrid was sleeping and took all of these pills.
Okay.
But I just thought, like, what a way to let him off the hook in the movie.
Yeah.
By putting the blame on Claire. Fine. We'll get rid of her. I don't need her. I need you. And I know they're doing it to, like, make her look more pathetic, but she doesn't need to look pathetic. That's not...
It's interesting because that's what Astrid's afraid she's going to do. Like, Astrid, in the course of that conversation where he's like, well, this isn't working out. We need to send her back. Astrid thinks to herself, she wanted him more than she wanted me. And she didn't protest right away. So, but then it's like, you know, even though she doesn't protest right away, she gives it a minute and then she does start to protest. And she's like, we can't just do that. And I care about her and she doesn't have anywhere else to go and the whole thing. Yeah. And, the thing is, if it really came right down to it, I think that's probably true though. I think maybe the movie was bearing out what they think if there had been a gauntlet thrown down. And Ron was like, if you don't send her back, I'm leaving. I think she probably would have caved.
Possibly.
But I guess we'll never know. Nope. And I have to say, one of the best written scenes of this entire book is Claire visiting Astrid's mother. So Astrid is keeping herself to herself. Her mother had been corresponding with her in the other places that she was staying. And Astrid clung to every bit of correspondence and their visits and the fact that her mother seemed to suddenly give a shit. And once she gets into this home and feels like she's being cared for, she starts to realize just what her mother has been like. It's putting everything in stark relief.
Mm-hmm.
And she pulls back from her interactions with her mother. But Claire is obsessed with Ingrid. Like, the whole thing is Claire suspects Ron is cheating on her. And here we have Ingrid, who found out that her man was cheating and poisoned him to death and is in prison. But yeah, she poisoned him to death, motherfucker.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely a bit of like fantasy and hero worship going on with Claire that I think that she's like, if only I had the balls to fucking poison Ron. Like,
yeah.
I don't think she really would, but you know what I mean? Like that sort of like admiration of having that kind of chutzpah, nerve.
And she also, because Ingrid is so talented. She's such a good poet. And she writes all this stuff that Claire's just like, oh my God, she's just so, what an artist.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of levels of like, this. She's everything I've never been able to be.
Right. So Astrid finds out that Claire has been writing to Ingrid asking to visit. And she is really disgusted at first. Like, she just feels like this whole part of her life is something that she has been trying to keep separate, and her mother has found a way in. Mm-hmm. And Astrid wants so badly for Claire to understand how dangerous her mother is. But Claire is too, like, she's too admiring, and she also thinks that Astrid is a child and can't really see her mother clearly. And just admires this woman so much from afar that she steamrolls right over Astrid's protests, takes her to visit, and the scene that the writing is so amazing as Astrid sits there and watches two entirely different conversations happening, where on the one hand, Claire thinks that she and Ingrid are getting along really well, and that Ingrid is a kindred spirit who understands her love of art, her love of feng shui, and like some of this new age crap, and that she's like really connecting with Astrid's mother, which is obviously important to her because Claire's a good person and wants to be on decent terms with Astrid's mother, which is like a nice thing that she cares about. But what is going on for Ingrid's part is that she is laughing at Claire and how pathetic Claire is, and looking at the fact that this woman has this like home and non-job and doesn't really do anything with herself, and she thinks she has nothing but contempt for it. And she can tell how close to the edge Claire is because Ingrid's a fucking predator. And she decides that she's going to mess with her because she resents the fact that Claire is getting between her and her daughter. So she speaks alone to Claire, even though Astrid does not want the two of them alone. There's not really a good way to like keep this from happening. And she just has to sit off to the side for a few minutes and watch as Claire's face gets drawn and worried, and her mother continues to talk to her. And Astrid is like, I had seen her like hypnotize cats in a similar way before. And sure enough, when they get in the car, Claire is crying, but talking about what a favor Astrid's mother did her by confirming her fears about Ron. To which Astrid's like, how can you say that she confirmed your fears? She doesn't know you. She doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And Claire's just like, yeah, but the warning signs, like, she knows. And Astrid, for her part, like, spoke to her mother and was like, you better back the fuck off. And her mother's like, why? It's fun. She's an idiot. And you'll be glad. Just pack your bags.
Yeah.
That's fucked up. That, I don't know how much, like, how much responsibility you can place for somebody committing suicide at somebody else's feet. Because it's a choice you make in the end. But I really do just hold Ingrid fully responsible.
She
I
pushed
really do.
all of the buttons that needed to be pushed. She saw someone weak. She knew exactly where to poke.
Yep.
And everything that Claire was using to hold herself together was now weakening. It was leaking out like pinpricks in a balloon. Just real slow, but she could not stay afloat anymore. And every single thing that happens after that is just widening those little holes.
Yeah.
To her. So she can't hold it together anymore.
She says to Ingrid says to Astrid, "It's so easy and fun, like drowning kittens." This bitch.
Yeah. They make her way less evil in the movie.
Good God. So, yeah, in the end, and Roshana is saying, because when you think of Ingrid's reaction to Barry and what Claire ends up doing in reaction to her fears about Ron. So Ingrid's reaction to Barry is flipping out and killing the guy, and what Claire ends up doing in her reaction to her fears about Ron. So basically what you're saying, Rashawn, is that Claire winds up doing the reverse.
Yeah, she puts it in on herself.
Yeah. Yeah, and Ingrid has no respect for that. Because that's weak. You don't take it on yourself. You make the person pay who did this to you. Like,
yeah, and then when Claire is like having this breakdown and Astrid won't talk to her, won't open her bedroom door, the words that Astrid is thinking to herself are weakling, pathetic. And those are Ingrid's words.
Like, Claire literally falls to her knees and grabs Ron around the legs as he's leaving.
Yeah.
It's like a piteous display. And it's part of what Ron is just looking at her with this, like, disgust as he's leaving. And Astrid is disgusted with herself for understanding how he feels. Like, she gets it.
Yeah.
Rashawn says, yeah, it's part of Claire's desire to be more like Ingrid, but knows in her heart she can never be, quote, strong like Ingrid. Yeah, you know, Rashawn actually covered Sharp Objects with me, and this is reminding me of the conversation between, and I'm forgetting the characters' names, the main character,
Camille,
and her little sister, half-sister.
Amma,
right. And Amma is like saying, because Camille has always sort of like submitted to men who wanted to have sex with her in this way that felt like she was being used. But Amma has this talk with her at one point about how she takes control, and that when men are having sex with her, she is taking something from them that she can use against them. So they're both like, for each of them, sex is like this weird sort of tool and this trauma. But Amma uses it in a way that Camille never found a way to do. Yeah. And despite the fact that Amma is clearly nuts, Camille has this sort of admiration for that she has found a way to survive and take some power back. And that's understandable. I mean, that's the thing with women, like, talking about, you know, me talking earlier about, like, okay, no, I don't condone murder, but what Barry did, like, when you are constantly disempowered, doing something bananas is going to seem like a wild fantasy that you want to emulate in a way. It makes so much sense. Rashawn says, what pushes Claire over the edge is how much she hates herself for being weak. Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's true. That. So, that leads to her being moved, because Ron tries to tell her you can still stay, to which I'm like, Ron. Yeah, why? Like, A, who's going to be home ever? You're always gone. Who's taking care of this child? B, why would the fuck she want to? You just totally, like, yeah, I don't know. It's just to ease his guilt. That's really all it is. He knows she's not going to stay. And after that, at least in the audiobook, is when she goes to Reena's.
Did they skip the whole McLaren thing? The, like, group home?
Oh, no. I forgot about that. Yeah, she does go to the group home and she meets Paul there.
Yep.
And she has this kind of vibe there, like, you know what? I could stay here until I'm 18. You know, this would be fine. Like, it's maybe better, as, like, Spartan as everything is, than bouncing around all over the fucking place and getting attached to people only to have it all ripped away. So maybe I should just stay.
Yeah, because she's only got, like, 9 months or something before she turns 18? Something short, less than a year.
But this woman, like, comes tramping across the grass, loses a shoe in the mud, and just has this, like, kind of, like, attitude. Mm-hmm. And she sees this woman coming and is like, that's the one. All right, I'm going home with this bitch. And it's such a weird setup because, like, she sees this woman and there's that vibe to her of, like, okay, I feel it. This is the one. But instead of, like, what you would expect after a character has that sort of instinctual reaction, when she gets to that person's house, it's not like it's not happy. Mm-hmm. Everybody who's there is just like, oh, yeah, well, good luck for fucking being here. You know, just like, I thought that she would wind up somewhere feeling like she did at Claire's because of the way that she reacted to this woman. And it so does not work out that way.
I thought she picked Reena because the people that she was interviewing with were a couple who had not been able to have kids of their own, so they just kept taking on foster kids. And they were like, you know, there's kids in our neighborhood that are your age, and there's a yard, and blah, blah, blah. And she's just like, I don't want that. I don't want family. So she sees this wild woman walking across the lawn with her boobs out and her tight skirt and her high heels through the grass. And she's like, no, that one. Mm-hmm. That's not going to be family. That's not going to be something I care about losing. That's 9 months of my life until I turn 18.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
So then she gets there and there's these other girls there. And I'm thinking like, oh, great. So she's going to have these like girls against her. And then they end up like being really close, which I love.
Yes. I really expected them to be like butting heads all the time or for them to resent her for some reason. And instead they wind up like on the same side. And the one of them that's pregnant,
Yvonne.
I can't remember. Yvonne? Mm-hmm. She is so alone.
Yeah.
And is like having children. Like she's pregnant again. And we don't find out who the father is, do we? Like, that's never really discussed.
No. It's like, Astrid says something at one point about how she just keeps doing this thing where she clings to anybody who will allow her to cling to them. She has sex with them and she keeps getting pregnant. Like, this is the second time she's been pregnant. And, like, as soon as she has a baby, she sort of does the exact same thing again. Mm-hmm. She's just so desperate for someone to love her.
Yeah. Yeah, so this, like, there's so many things that happen here. She gets involved again with the dude, like, and I'm just like, Astrid, what you doing, though? Sergey, yeah. But it's different. She's, like, more in control of how she feels about the situation. It's not... Yeah.
It's not the same as it was. Like, she doesn't want him to love her. She's just like, whatever. He's really hot.
And she starts doing acid as well.
I actually said to Jason yesterday, I was like, so, like, I've done acid. I did it when I was, like, 18, 19, a few times. And it never occurred to me to go to a museum. And I really regret that. Because I bet that's amazing.
I have never done acid, and that terrifies me.
Well, I would not recommend it to you, given our recent conversation that you would hate it. It would be awful. You would hate it.
I really know. Like, I would, though. Sean. Acid is the best.
I loved it back then, but I would never do it now because I would not want to be that out of control.
Yeah.
And when I was 18, I was so like tightly wound that taking acid was what it loosened me up. It let me be out of control because I never allowed myself to be out of control. And now I would not want that.
That's a huge reason why I didn't do drugs when I was younger, was because I'm a control freak, and I was a control freak then, as I am now, and I was just like, no.
Psychedelics are not something I would recommend for you. I did say to Jason that, like, while I would never do acid now, I kind of do want to go to France and get some mushrooms and go to the Musée d'Orsay and just stare at some Van Goghs while I'm on mushrooms. Because mushrooms is not this, it's psychedelic, but it's not quite the same. It's not as intense. It's really kind of relaxing. And I think that would be really neat. What a neat idea to have psychedelics, like, enhance the art for you.
Yeah. Yeah, because I really did like that scene. And the fact that she's like, oh, there's paintings of peaches, and I was able to reach in and pick up a peach and put it down on the table. And I was like, that's wild.
Yeah. I do have a problem
they're,
at
like,
museums.
Checking out, and she's like, "Oh, the cashier looked like a tapioca pudding." And I'm like, word? How? Okay.
Yeah, I love how she describes everything. I like how she describes the art. I like how she describes the people around her. I like the idea of them, like, being like, "Oh my god, I have to touch this art," and being yelled at because that happens to me at museums all the time. I now walk around museums with my hands behind my back because sometimes I can't help it and I want to touch it. And Jason gets really mad at me.
Do you try and put them in your mouth?
No. They're very big. Those pieces of art are large. But, yeah, I just thought that was so creative. And I did not remember that from when I read it before. And it might be my favorite thing in the whole book.
Yeah, it just seems like a nice escape for her. Like she's just been through so much, and this is what triggers her memories of somebody named Annie.
Yeah.
And this leads into, like, the final movement of the book, because she can't figure out where some of these memories are coming from. But she remembers the name Annie very specifically. And a woman finally comes to her who is going to be, this woman is her mother's attorney, and they are going to try and appeal her mother's conviction. And she wants, essentially, for Astrid to come in and lie on the stand about how this never, like, none of the stuff that she saw did she even see, you know?
Well, because she did not testify the first time, right?
I think she did, and she didn't lie well enough, and so she felt guilty about it. Because she says to her mom when she sees her finally, "I thought you'd be mad at me." And her mother's like, "Why?" And she thinks to herself, "Because I didn't lie well enough." So yeah, she's, like, excited, Astrid is, because at first she's like, "Absolutely not. What? No, I'm not doing this. She's awful." But then she realizes that this is the first time in her life that she has ever had something her mother needed. And she's never, ever had that kind of power over the woman before. And now she has a chip that she can bargain with, because she has wanted information about who her father is, and her mother always refused to talk about it. So they set up a meeting, and her mother immediately can see that she has turned a corner and is not taking any of this shit anymore. And she tries to frame it like, it seems like you've lost who you are. And it's like, no, you've lost who she is. That's not the same thing. But she tells her mom, "You know what? I'll lie for you if you'll tell me about my dad and you'll tell me who Annie was." And her mother's like, "How do you even, like, remember that? Are you serious?"
Well, she starts talking about Annie like, "Oh, as a neighbor, and she would, like, take care of the neighborhood kids sometimes, and, like, yeah, sometimes she would babysit you." And Astrid asks her, like, a specific question, and it throws Ingrid, and she's like, how do you even remember that? Because she never would have. This is something I would like my mother to read. Because I will bring stuff up that I remember from when I was like 3 or 4 years old. And she was like, no, it didn't happen like that. I'm like, Mom, I remember it. I have a clear picture in my mind of this thing occurring. And she just can't believe that it's possible that I can remember that. And I would like her to read something like this so I can be like, please, trust me. Sometimes memories are just there. You don't know why. That's why I asked about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So finally, her mother admits, like, she tells her about who her father was, and he was some artist that was not too impressive. And her mother is very reticent to admit that she was even in love with the guy because she clearly views that as some sort of weakness. Mm-hmm. But finally, Astrid tells her, I read your journals. I know that you were in love with him. And her mom's like, fine, I was in love with him, okay? But he was also, like, super childish. And he actually started a fire. And you were in the house. And I just did not want anything to do with him after that. It was clear that things were already heading downhill. And Astrid's like, well, did he try and find me? And at first, Ingrid's like, no, he didn't. And then she's like, well, okay, yeah, a couple times. But I didn't want him to get anywhere near you. And she makes it sound like, at this point, I just had your best interest at heart because I was such a committed mother. Until Astrid's like, okay, so Annie. And then it comes out that Ingrid, because when Astrid says, and then you got pregnant, Ingrid bristles and is like, no, getting pregnant is what happens to your illiterate friends. I chose to have you. She acts like this is a whole other thing. Mm-hmm. But then when she's explaining what went on with Anne, she says, you don't know what it was like for somebody my age to have a child they weren't prepared for.
She doesn't say my age. She says someone like me.
Oh, someone like me, right. So, like, she tries to act like I was so in control of the situation, but then, like, a beat later is like, well, it was just, you know, I was kind of a victim in all of this.
Yeah,
I didn't
mommy,
know what I was
mommy,
getting
mommy.
into.
You kept grasping at me.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
and
that's
she
what kids
shudders,
do.
And Astrid's like, wow, the memory of me touching you as a child makes you shudder even now. Like, this is disgusting and I hate you. And she admits that she dropped Astrid off to go to the beach with some friends and that the feeling of freedom was so profound after having been chained to this child, as Astrid would probably say, that she did not come back for her for about a year.
Yeah.
And Astrid remembers that timing lines up with memories that she has, and it also explains why she clung to her mother so much on the first day of school, why she always was, like, sure that her mother was destined for something better and that Astrid was holding her back. It's
her, like, very deep-seated fear of abandonment.
Yep.
That you were going to forget me on a bus. You were gonna tie me up outside of a grocery store and not remember to untie me later.
Yeah. Yeah, so Astrid finally tries to be like, she sort of tries to push it one extra step because her mother's like, is there anything else you want to know? Are we good? And she's like, her mother tries to be like, you have to understand that I do love you, that I went through this terrible time and it was really difficult, but I love you and I would do anything to go back and fix it. And Astrid's like, oh, really? Well, how about you just do this thing, which is give up your attempt to make me lie for you and stay in prison. That could be something where you don't try to take something from me in exchange for this information that you should have given me because I'm a person. Mm-hmm. And at first, she thinks she's, like, made a tactical error and looks at her mother's face and is like, I shouldn't have done this. She's not going to give me what I want, and it's just going to bum me out. And she tries to sort of take it back. But surprisingly, Ingrid is like, all right, I won't make you testify. Let's just leave it. And Astrid is really, like, kind of shocked. I was shocked. Mm-hmm. As the listener, I was just like, really? So it's sort of like a fast forward in time to her living in Berlin with Paul. And she had been so sure that without her testimony, there's no way her mom's getting out. But Paul brings her a newspaper, and it turns out that they played it, that Barry killed himself and framed her for it. To fuck her life up. Mm-hmm. And they bought it. Mm-hmm. And she's out, and she's like thanking everybody for believing in her and that justice has been served and the whole thing. And she has been dangling the possibility of coming to college in front of Astrid's face.
Well, because she keeps getting these offers to be a professor, a poetry professor.
And Astrid entertains the thought in fantasy for like a minute. Mm-hmm. Being, the daughter of a professor and being able to live that kind of life. But she knows that would require her getting re-entangled in her mother. And she just can't do it. And decides that she is going to keep herself to herself. But it's still a huge temptation. It's still something that, she's obviously going to struggle with and go back and forth with, the rest of her life.
Yeah.
But I really liked the fact that she is able to decide that for herself and move past this woman. I am so mad that she got out of prison, though.
She doesn't in the movie.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, movie, way to pull punches.
She doesn't make Astrid testify. Astrid's at the court to testify. She's out in the hall waiting to be called in, and then the jury is let out, and she's confused. She goes in, talks to the lawyer, and the lawyer's like, she decided not to have you testify. And they're putting her back in handcuffs and leading her away, and she just turns around and smiles at Astrid, or gives her a look. And then it kind of ends with her watching her mom get back on the prison bus. And then she and Paul move to New York, and she makes her little suitcase diorama things.
Right.
And talks about how, her mother let her go. Because that's what she says to her mom in that conversation is, not just don't make me testify, but let me go. Mm-hmm. Stop doing this to me. Stop making me come back to you.
Right.
And so that's what, it ends with that sort of hopeful note or whatever of her being let go.
Interesting. Well,
I like it either way.
I feel like that still works. Mm-hmm. But I like the fact that in the book, it's frustrating, but it's true that people are still falling for her shit. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing I think we need to keep in mind is that, nobody's ever going to believe Astrid's version of who her mother is. Her mother is too good at cultivating a personality and a fan club. And Astrid's shit out of luck if she wants anybody to take her side on that kind of thing.
Yeah, she's very, very manipulative. And I think the reason that she couldn't use those skills when she was first put on trial is because they had her drugged up to keep her under control. So she never really got to work that Ingrid magic on the jury, on the judge. Now she gets to. And this is on top of the fact that in the last 6 years, I think it has been, she's become very well known by publishing her poetry in different magazines and being interviewed. And there's feminism classes from the local college where they're going to interview her and they want to talk to her and she's so misunderstood. So she's cultivated a cult of personality around herself.
Yeah, and I think that's a really true thing that the ending from the movie is sidestepping a little bit that I like. Because that feels like something that I guess this kind of ties back to something that I was talking about because there's another book that I just finished covering for Spoil Me. And the ending of the first book is so satisfying that even though I want more from this writer, the second book reminds me that nothing is ever really finished and that life continues to move right along and we just repeat our mistakes and there's never real closure on anything. And I think the movie is trying for some closure.
Yeah.
That isn't actually something that we ever get. And I think the book reflects that a lot more honestly.
Yeah.
But Astrid is going to have to live with this woman out in the world, continuing to spin her bullshit. And she's just going to have to make peace with the fact that people are going to believe her. And that's a tough thing to, like, live with.
Yeah, the movie also does not make Ingrid nearly as manipulative as she is in the book. It to a point where it kind of annoyed me. She's very affectionate with Astrid in the movie. And that is not how she is in the book. She never touches her in the book.
Yeah.
Or
She's
very rarely.
Extremely distant. It's like Astrid isn't even there most of the time.
Yeah. Like from the very first scene of them together before Ingrid does what she does, they're like sitting up on the roof of their apartment building, like looking at the lights of LA and the Santa Anas are blowing, and she like wants Astrid to come sit with her and like puts her arm around her and like holds her really close and like strokes her hair, and it's like, well, that's all right, you're already trying to make it more palatable.
Yeah.
As if having Michelle Pfeiffer play her wasn't palatable enough. It's very hard to dislike her, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I liked this book, though. It's, like, tough, but Rashawn says white women can never be awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rashawn, we actually started off this episode talking about how, especially in television and movies, we notice a softening of a lot of female characters who are really unlikable in the books, whatever the source material is, but usually books, and how they are portrayed very differently because it seems like they don't think the audience can handle somebody who is, like, that flawed.
You can't be that flawed and not have a dick.
You know, and it's just like, it's really frustrating because it really undermines parts of the message and the overall tone of things, I think, if you're going to just be that soft about it. But yeah.
There is something in the book, it's not a particular scene. It's just something I noticed reading it this time around. The way that the author changes the language as Astrid grows.
Yeah.
At the beginning, it's as if she's an actual reflection of her mother. She speaks the way her mother does. She thinks the way her mother does. It's written in these like poetic, you know, straight out of some old book kind of way. And then with each person, she grows, and the way that she thinks grows. So the language in the book changes.
Yeah.
And I like that so much. It's subtle, but it's there, and I think that's just really clever.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the way that she's like, you know, I ask now what's in it for me every time. And I really like that change in her attitude.
Yeah.
Specifically. And the fact that she acknowledges that, I feel like one could say how hard she leans into that makes it sort of like an affectation. But I would argue that when you're trying to change a pattern of behavior that has been harmful in your life, it is an affectation at first. You have to fake it till you make it. And that's just something that being conscious of the way you used to be leads to you having to be conscious. Like, there's no changing a pattern without there being actual effort. So that's just sort of going to go hand in hand.
It's true. I had somebody at work yesterday say, "But you are a bubbly person," and I was like, "Girl, this isn't how I really am. This is my Starbucks face." And she's like, "I don't believe it." And I was like, "Well, then I'm doing a really good job. Thank you."
A guy I used to work with called me Bubbles. That was his nickname for me. And I really, at the time, I was like, that irritates the fuck out of me, but I can't really understand why. And now I'm like, oh my God, I would murder him.
Yeah.
All right. So is there anything else that you want to mention about this before we move on?
No. I'm glad you liked it.
Me too.
The author wrote another book called Paint It Black, which I also really liked, and it's another story about mothers and daughters, but it's a mother and her son's girlfriend, the relationship between the two of them after he kills himself. Oof. And it's really, haven't read it in a long time, but I remember just while I was reading it, just being like, oh my God, this is so good. So maybe that's something you'll check out someday, or our listeners will want to check out at some point. I think Janet Fitch is a really good writer.
I was really impressed with some of the turns of phrase in this. Definitely.
Yeah. I just found out she had a third book, and I immediately ordered it on Amazon. I was like, how did I not know she'd written another book? And it takes place during the Russian Revolution, and I'm so in. I just want to read it. Okay,
that's a change of pace.
Yeah.
Rashawn's asking if we've read She's Come Undone by Wally Lamb.
I have
not.
I have never hated a book more than that. I continually threw it across the room while I was reading it, and I finished it just out of spite. I had to finish it because I needed to know that I hated every second of it.
I completely understand what you mean. That's something that I anticipate the argument that, well, if you had read the whole thing, you'd know. And I'm just like, I'm going to cut you right off there, and I'm going to go ahead and finish this so that I can tell you that without reservation, this was garbage.
That is exactly why I finished it, because it had been so highly recommended to me, and I hated everything about it. And so I was like, I am going to finish this fucking book so that I know I hated everything in it. And I totally did.
Rashawn says it's a book I've been terrified to revisit. Wow. Taking that one off my list.
People recommend it all the time still, and I'm like, why?
Listen, I don't trust anybody anymore with recommendations. I've been burned, baby.
That's why I can't believe you do so many Spoil Me books.
Honestly, the Spoil Me books I have had such better luck with.
It's crazy.
And I think it's because Spoil Me, people are like, I know nobody else has read this weird, obscure thing, so I'm going to pay for you to read it because I know it's not making it on a book club list because it won't get the votes. Yeah. So it's smaller stuff that doesn't have a backing, and sometimes I think people vote for stuff that isn't good because they're like, I can't wait to hear you tear this apart. And so they pick things that aren't particularly good on purpose for the fun of here. People expected me to really hate Ready Player One. Kind of thing, these are...
I don't like these protest votes. Don't throw in your protest votes, okay?
I think there is a place for reading a book that's been recommended that everybody's agreed in the interim is not as good, it's overrated, and having that conversation. But the problem is that I don't necessarily know that about it when I go into it, so I go in very vulnerable, ready to be like, yeah, let's get it. And then I start to be like, what the fuck? And I haven't been warned.
Third-party book club voters.
Oh, God. But next month's book, and I'm going to asterisk this, guys. The next month's book that was scheduled was Mistborn by Brian Sanderson to be covered with Miles. Oh. Miles is really not a huge fan of the idea of me covering this book in one go. The thing is that it's not actually... There is no possible way for me to fit a new podcast in for at least 4 years. And I'm not exaggerating. That is genuinely
I believe you.
Yeah. Everything that I'm covering right now are parts of enormous sets of series that just... There's not an end in sight, and it's going to be a while. So this is the sort of thing that, if we were going to cover it as a regular podcast, it would have to be a very, a patrons only thing, or it would be a Spoil Me that somebody would have to commission. And so what I'm saying is, and somebody wrote in also, and they were like, I can't help but notice next month's book is Mistborn, and I would really encourage you to not do that in one go.
Is it really long?
I don't think that's it. I think it's that it's
really
super complex.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who have very heavily recommended his books to me because I love George R. R. Martin's books so much.
Right.
And because Sanderson writes super fast. So he's always putting stuff out. And to be honest, I am very scared of most fantasy. I like Lord of the Rings. And I like Harry Potter, which is kind of fantasy. and I like A Song of Ice and Fire. And most other fantasy has been really hard for me to get into. So I haven't... oh my god, my Mac is at a low battery level.
Uh-oh. Well, we have to wrap anyway.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know much about his books except that people love them.
Well, I just wanted to let you guys know that is on the table to change. So I'm letting you know that, like, as of right now, that's what I'm covering for June. But that may be different. So keep an eye out on Facebook and whatnot, because I will announce it there if I decide to change that.
You should pick something that you have really... You should pick something you have really, really wanted to read and haven't had the time to. As a replacement.
That's a whole other conversation. So I'm going to table that idea for later. But yeah. All right. Thank you, Jaime, for joining me. I appreciate it very much.
I know this is 3 in a row with me. So, guys, you probably won't see me until next year.
But yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I am glad that you lobbied for this one, because I really did like this book.
Yay!
And I just can't believe the timing of it being right before Mother's Day.
I know, weird, right?
All right, everybody. Well, thank you all for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next month with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
Bye.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.